Vincent Hall, and welcome to another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. Last week, if you recall, we were looking at drawing a singular object, and I had selected a conch shell because I felt like going to the beach, at least in my mind. And conch shells have some interesting forms. They're very organic in shape, yet geometric at the same time. As you recall, we found a lot of triangle shapes in that conch shell. So today we're going to combine 2 weeks ago, which was reflections in glass, and the idea of the conch shell, which was geometric shapes and proportions, and create a drawing based on, wait for the term, visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy is something you've been surrounded with your whole life and probably never looked at it and went, there's visual hierarchy. Yet, if you have a couple of paintings hanging in your apartment, or maybe the way you've arranged some vases or your coffee mugs, you already are playing with visual hierarchy. It's where something is more important than everything else around it. And it might be because of the size of the object, the color, using repetition, using distance, using texture, if you will, to create visual hierarchy. The world would be a really boring place if everything was the same size, same color, same texture. So the idea of integrating all of these variables into a drawing can really make your drawing composition take off. So today we're going to try something using one object, but many of them, so multiple objects. Last week we did one singular object. Today's going to be many of the same thing. So we're going to be using that visual hierarchy to create size, shape, and color. So I bet you're thinking, wow, and this wouldn't be the first time I've heard it. Think Mel's lost her marbles. Maybe, but I found them. Okay, I found my marbles again. So we're ready to get started with the lesson. I've moved them into a jar so that we'll be able to look and see which ones we want to use. Now this by itself would be a really interesting drawing lesson if you feel like you're in for a challenge. But we're going to try to keep things basic here. So we're going to be using regular pencil or color pencil and some different things that we can trace to make different size circles. If you have a roll of tape at home, paper cup, maybe a mug, heck, a candle might work for tracing things. Money, different color, sizes, different types, even the little penny if you want to go super small. Or, I was looking at this for my watercolor painting and the bottom of a spray bottle, or maybe a medicine bottle or a lid or something like that. So if you look around, you'll find circles almost everywhere around where you're living. So it shouldn't be hard to find something you can trace. Of course, if you have a compass and you want to use it, you can, but I think it's easier to just find something like a roll of tape and trace it. Easy peasy, let's get started. I wanted to show you my still life setup so you can get an idea of what I'm going to be drawing from before I turn the camera down to the paper that I'm drawing on. This is a simple piece of white paper that I just propped up. You can see the edge of the top there against some soup cans to hold it up, and then lay the marbles on the bottom. We've done this before to create a simple backdrop. You don't have to do this, but it helps to have a simple color behind glass objects like we did with the glass object drawing in order to isolate the shapes and the shadows from all the visual noise around it. Now you'll notice in the visual hierarchy, I have two things that are about the same. These two larger marbles, and then I've got my small blue clear marble next to them, and I have them spaced just about where I want them to create an interesting triangle effect. Now in this case, visual hierarchy normally would mean size might make things more important, but since these two are the same size, it's actually that smaller one that's going to create the visual hierarchy, and that has more importance. Also, if you notice the shadow, because that blue marble is more glass and not opaque, it has this really interesting highlight inside its shadow that it casts. So we're going to be drawing that as well. We're going to be using colored pencil for most of this, but I'll show you how you can adapt other medium as well. The first thing I'm going to do is just demonstrate how to draw one simple marble so that when I move to this gray paper that I'm going to use for colored pencil, you can follow along, because I know it's a little harder to see this gray than it is to just see white pencil. So we'll go over the dynamics of how to draw a singular marble. Now, I know a lot of you probably don't have marbles lying around the house, but anything that's a group of the same items would work. It could be a grouping of flowers. It could be a grouping of M&Ms, candy that are all the same size. I'm looking around my house right now to think of these things. A grouping of vegetables or fruit, maybe pears, which you'll see in an upcoming slide on a finished piece. Anything really, some tools, nuts and bolts, maybe several spoons, whatever you have multiples of that you can draw the same thing. But for my marble, I'm just going to trace the inside of my tape, and that's the end of my tape. And hopefully here you can see this circle that I just drew. Okay, as you can see, I have my circle, and all I'm going to be doing is taking my colored pencil, or if I'm doing this in graphite, my regular pencil, and just drawing the shapes that I see for the colors of the marble. And this is a red marble with a little bit of white, and then a green shape that I see that sort of tapers off. So I'm doing this a little lighter, but I'm going to shade it in. So I'm going to quickly do this one all in graphite in case that's where you're going to be. But the real fun is going to be doing this more in colored pencil. Then what I'm just going to do is take the graphite and lightly color in mostly the whole area that I see as one color. Now I'm going to let my paper be the white. So where this marble was colored white, and I'm going both directions, then I'm going to use a blender to blend this in. And if you remember from 2 weeks ago, I can also add some water if I really want to add some interesting blended tones together, because graphite is water soluble, believe it or not. They don't often tell you that when you're drawing, but if you find out by spilling something on a drawing by accident, you'll find out that it does in fact become water soluble. All right, starts to look a little bit like the earth. Now I'm going to take my blender, but you could just as easily use the Q-tips if you want. Either way is gonna work. And I'm just gonna softly blend all this in. And I'm gonna worry about getting the details a little bit later by using my eraser to clean all that up. I'm just getting the basics in. And then I see a little bit of a shadow underneath where the white is. The white's not white everywhere. Okay. And then, before I do anything else, all of these marbles create a rounded or an elliptical shadow. So if I put a dot about a third of the way up my marble and another dot just about on the bottom, and I connect these in an oblong shape, I can roughly get the idea of my shadow. And depending on your light, you might have 1 or 2 shadows. Mine happens to have a second shadow because the way my light's coming in my kitchen, it almost looks like an atom right now, but that's how it looks. And the darkest part of the shadow are where these 2 ellipses overlap, just because they have multiple tones. So I'm just gonna really lightly rough in my shadows and just leave that be. And I might take that other one out because I only have the 1 marble. Now what I can do is take my eraser and go back in and get some of these areas cleaned up around the marble, and also start to take out areas that were white and get rid of that line, because it's just as important to have white areas where there's no line as it is to have dark shadows. So keeping that in mind as you're looking around, and then I'm erasing out for my white paper to be my highlight where I see these really white highlights on my marble. Now, if you're doing this without lights on in the house, the lighting is going to change as the day progresses. So you might want to kind of get this done pretty fast if you're practicing the shading. Then the idea is to just go back in and build more layers of little parts of the colors where I'm seeing the darker areas and noticing where things are just have those teeny tiny little variations on a theme, because that's what makes the difference in the marble. And then I'm seeing through this marble, because it's glass, some other little areas in here. So I'm getting my secondary shadows and lightly blending them in. Then before I go any further, I'm going to also blend or burnish, that's another term for getting these shadows in, around my marble so that I can start to see where everything goes shape-wise. And believe it or not, sometimes there's even highlights in the shadows. It sounds like an oxymoron, but when you have something glass and it's see-through, you usually have a highlight coming through because it will reflect into its own shadow. And then there's always that area underneath that's even darker than the rest of the shadow around it. So I'm going to shade that in. Again, this is all called drawing what you see, not what you think you know, but what you're actually seeing. And that's going to make a huge difference in how this finished drawing looks. And I'm just coming back in through here. And then where I see another little highlight right here on the end, I'm just using the edge of my eraser to erase in that little bit of a highlight. So if I were drawing this and keeping on going, I would certainly go back in and get more areas. But the idea is we're trying to ground a rounded object. We're showing the shadow, and this is how I'm going to get my highlights and the depth. But it's time to move on to the actual project, which is colored pencil and 3 marbles to create visual hierarchy. So I have gray paper. I choose a neutral surface so that I can use my white color pencil to create my highlights. And I'm also going to be able to build up a little more layers because this paper is a little rough. I used to really make my high school students laugh because the term of this kind of paper is called bogus gray, which really it's not fake gray or bogus, but that's just the name of the paper. So here we are, we're ready to get started, and I'm going to go a little bit bigger than what my marbles are, actually a lot bigger. So my 2 big marbles are once again going to be the inside of my tape. Now, since one is behind the other, the way I've drawn this, I'm not going to draw the entire, if I can hold this up, boy, pencil on gray is a challenge. But what I did here is draw the 2 different circles and only did traced half of the other one. Then I'm going to take something smaller, in this case it's my candle, to make my small blue marble, which is standing away from the other ones. And I'm just tracing around the bottom of this marble. There we go. So now that I have my 3 circles planned out, it's time to get started on the colored pencil. By switching to a white colored pencil first, you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going back over that traced outline completely with white, which I may decide to erase, but it's for 2 purposes. One, so it'll pick up better on the camera, because today is a cloudy day at my house, so no matter how many kitchen lights I have on, it's a little difficult to see gray pencil on gray paper, but I think everybody can see the white now that I'm laying this in. And then my little glass ball over here, my little marble, that in visual hierarchy now has become the most important thing because it's all by itself, and that size-wise it's smaller than the other 2. So I have these planned out. Now, with my same white pencil, I'm going to draw in, I'll use this marble as reference, all of the little shapes and highlights that I see, just like we did when we were drawing glass and the conch shell. Only this time, we're creating a composition with 3 objects. So this first one down here is mostly red, and it has this big red area. And yes, I'm using white because that's the easiest thing to cover up later on. And then it has that little bit of white, and then the green comes in and kind of comes down to the bottom. It doesn't look like much right now, but it should look like something in a few minutes once we add the color. This one is red, white, and blue. We've got our patriotic marble. And the stripe is bigger on the white, and it comes down and right through it. And again, you don't want to overthink the shapes of these little glass areas. They're interesting in and of themselves. And then this blue one, which is mostly clear, has like a little shape of colored glass inside of it. It almost looks a bit like a star where the blue comes around, and the rest is just going to be different shadows of grays and things. But let's get started with the red. I'm going to start with my lighter red here, which is a scarlet red or rouge red, just not a dark one. And we're just going to start by using medium pressure. You could use pastel, by the way, too, if you want. But I know from what people have told me in the art center, a lot of folks have colored pencils at home, and that seems to be the easiest thing to use. But chalk, pastel, any dry medium will work. And obviously you could paint this. I think an acrylic painting or a watercolor painting of marbles would be really fun and fascinating at the same time. So I'm going around and I'm just lightly coloring in where my red is going to go. And then my one marble has a green, and I'm using the lightest color greens first. So here's my lighter green, and I'm just going to color this in. Just using a medium pressure, not too hard at all. And that's it for the green, just to lay that in. And then my other marble has a dark blue, like a violet blue. So I'm going to use this color to give this kind of deeper blue tone just where I see it coming around the other marble. And then behind it, this one's starting to look a little bit like the Pepsi brand now that I look at it. And then this same blue is in my little marble that's going to be my accent piece. Notice here I also have 3 objects. You want to stay, when you're doing visual hierarchy, in the land of odd numbers. Now last week we did 1, so by its very nature it became 1 in of itself. It was important because it was the only thing on the paper. But in other visual hierarchy things, 3, 5, 7, 9, I mean, you could keep going up, but those are the areas that you want to get. All right. So what I have done now is just block in some colors. Still doesn't look much like a reflectable marble, but it's going to. However, we do have to get those shapes drawn in for the shadows. So I'm taking my black color pencil and I'm plotting where I see my shadows. Now the one that's in the background, put my 2 dots and I'm connecting them. This one has a pretty short shadow because it's going right behind the rest of the marbles, and it's just casting a dark shadow. This is also based on the light in my house. Your light may very well vary. This one has a longer one, so here we're doing our connect the dots to make this ellipse. I'm just gonna make this one longer anyway, because sometimes you just have to visually change things so they work better for you. And I'm just gonna shade this shadow in lightly. So we're just getting the idea of where these shadows go on this reflected object. And then this one has the longest shadow. So again, my 2 points, one at the bottom, one at about maybe almost halfway up on the smaller one, and then just connect them. So it almost looks like an elongated U, or maybe an arched doorway or something like that. And because this one is that glass we were talking about, I'm going to erase out where my highlight's going to go in the shadow. Now it's time to have some fun playing around with the colors. Once we have our basic colors in, we can go back with a variety of colors and start pressing in. That's the beauty of using these colored pencils, is they're buildable. So where I see the darker reds, and here, I'm going to erase out my white now that you can see where this goes, so I can put in my darker red and not have some weird pinkish glow, because I really want a deep red around the edge of this, and start blending it in. So while you look around for something you might want to draw multiples of and start plotting it out, I'm going to fill in a little more of my red, and we'll be right back. That gave me a little bit of time to build up some color. So what I did was I kept this red and I went over everything, and then I went to a deep red. So if you have a dark red or a reddish brown color or even green that will deepen red, those all work. And I just added some depth. And then I happen to have a pink color pencil that I don't use very much, although my granddaughter wishes I used it all the time because that's her favorite color. And I just went in where I see these lighter highlights just to start to build up the red, but we haven't touched the green or the blue, and that's what I wanted to share with you next. However, before we go to either green or blue, we're going to go in and add our white, because that's key to starting to show this marble as having some dimension. However, the white isn't all the same degree of white. It's actually lighter in areas and grayer in others. So I'm going to leave the gray paper be the gray, and I'm just lightly, barely touching the surface here, if you can see, to get a little bit of a light. And then where I see the light, I'm going to add that in. I see like a little white dot from my overhead kitchen lights here, and then coming around, and this is light. So this is light pressure, because a lot of my whites on this marble happen to be more in the gray tones. They're really not white. And then I can go back in here and add the little white dots that I see for the lights coming through on the highlights of the marble. And then I'm going to go back in and do the same thing with my green. So I have my lighter green. I'm now going to go to a darker green, and we've got two darker greens here. I'm going to go to this one first, and it's just a smidgen darker than what it was from the first colored pencil. So I'm just going over areas that look a little bit darker, and I'll give you a chance to see my composition that I'm looking at in a minute. And then I'm taking my darkest green pencil and just going in where I see the darkest areas, which are right along the edge of this white. And it creates a really interesting shadow right here. And again, we're going to blend all this in, but I just want you to get a chance to see where we're going with the shadows and the highlights of this marble. Don't press too hard. I just pressed a little harder and my marble started to shake, and I don't want to lose my marbles again. So anyway, okay, now on to the blue. And as I had mentioned, this blue is a dark blue. So in order to blend it, I'm actually taking a lighter blue. This is cerulean blue, and going over it just to give it a little more oomph and to show the lighter parts of this blue marble down here. But this marble has a lot of dark areas, but there's lighter parts within it. And it's by drawing these dark and light areas that you're gonna get a chance to see what's really going on through here. Now, this marble also has white, but it's more see-through. So if this is on a lighter colored surface or whatever it might be, I'm just going to use my white very sparingly and draw in some of these areas that I see as my highest highlights. But now I'm going to go back in and use my blue instead of graphite to tone a lot of this in, because it really does have more of a bluish tone all the way around, and it'll start to get this marble some shape and should start to look a little bit more like we're seeing through the marble to the other side. Now, if I notice I need to go darker, which I do here, again, remember, all artists talk to themselves, so don't be afraid to talk to yourself. Then I go back over it again with the same color I used. I'm just gonna get a richer version of that color. And then this color is actually casting its own shadow down here. So I'm going to take this blue and kind of go into my shadow here. I'm going to take a little bit of my red and go into my shadow here, because remember, when something is glass or has something that's see-through, you can actually, that color gets transferred to the shadows. So we can take some of that color into the gray that we had already put in as a shadow and start to build up something that looks a little more believable. So if I see a little bit of green coming out here on the edge, just coming around here, and this one has a little bit of blue coming on this part. This one's all blue, so it won't be too hard to do that. And then I can go back in with my white and add where I see the lighter tones of my shadow, because there's going to be some light tones, and this also helps blend my shadow. And this little guy has this little white highlight going on where the highlight comes right through the marble. And I'm just adding in some of the white areas where I see these little dots. Now I'm going to show you a trick, because color pencil can only take you so far. And then if you really want these white areas, you might have to go to what we call mixed media and maybe use a little paint or a little chalk. So we're going to try both and we'll see which one works best. In looking at my highlights, I realized I could either use a white lead pencil or white graphite pencil, or I could use just a smidgen of white acrylic paint. Now, I recognize not everyone has white acrylic paint at home, so feel free to just use white, whatever you might have. If you have a white colored pencil, that works. If you have white pastel, either oil pastel or white, the chalky kind, the dry pastel, that works. But I'm just going to use a little dab of this white. You can see this is barely just a smidgen of it, just to go back in and add those white areas that no matter what I was doing, my white colored pencil just won't pick it up. And I'm just using a really simple brush, small, of course. And I'm just getting these tiny little highlights where I see little light dings from the light source around it. This happens to be the biggest one. Now, I love experimenting, pardon my arm. And one of the things I've noticed is Berol Prismacolors, although they do melt with a blender or with basically a marker without any kind of marker pigment in it, because it's called xylene, but that's a chemical and you don't want to be smelling that. But water is now blending my Prismacolor. And I am going to be honest with you, I just figured this out today. So you are witnessing the birth of invention here on my end, at least, because I had no idea. So now I can take these colors and where I'm seeing through them, just take a little bit of water. Of course, I'm going to clean my brush, but I am blown away. Just like we could blend in graphite, these are the Berol wax-based, these are not watercolor pencils, but you can blend regular color pencils using water and you can get this really beautiful effect. So if all you happen to have at home is a brush, some water, and a few color pencils, you can really make some dynamic and interesting drawings. I can't wait to try this drawing people because I love doing portraits, but this is game changer for me. So I can do this to blend this in. It's much better than using a blender. And the beauty is I can go back over this and get different colors. See how it's even blending my whites? So I'm going over this marble that down here was giving me a little bit of trouble. And I can blend in my shadows, which now is really giving some depth to my marble and making it look like it's standing away from the background area, because it's really important. Oh, wow, I love this. This looks so cool. And it just gets lighter as it fades away. But now, all of a sudden, our drawing is starting to look a little more three-dimensional. Some of this water, and that'll dry as it goes away from here. But it's starting to get the idea of depth, and that's where we were headed with all of this. Wow. What a difference using water on colored pencil can do. So plain old water, simple little brush. This is just a craft brush. It's not even one I use to do painting with. I use it actually to put glue on things. So that's how simple this brush is. But you could use a Q-tip too. So whatever you have around the house that would absorb a little bit of water, let's just play with a Q-tip and see what happens. Little water in the Q-tip. Where haven't I blended yet? Right here on the green. And you'll know it's working if there's a little bit of pigment on the Q-tip. And there is, so we know that this will work. So fear not. Whatever you have laying around the house is going to work to give you this fun project. Simple objects, simple ideas, they can be a lot of fun. Now you could also put other things in the background. Maybe I wanted to just pretend that there was a tablecloth or something like that, or ground it just by drawing in a horizon line here, which happens to be the edge of my table. You don't have to do much. I'll just shade this down a little bit. This is very similar to what we just did last week. But by drawing this in its simplicity, now I've grounded my shapes a little bit, and I've got pretty much my finished drawing. Here was what I was looking at for my composition, and then I'm going to show you the finished drawing. Of course, I've modified it a little bit, but the idea is you could keep things on a white background. I could even color in my gray paper white if I wanted to, or stick with white paper, but it doesn't have to be hard. And it's wonderful practice in seeing shadows and shapes and learning how to make things look three-dimensional. So what I've done here is just simply add a little bit of white highlight along the back of my marbles. As you can see, I'm coming in here a little bit. I just wanted to give a little more of a finished look. And this I'm not going to blend in because, again, if we blend everything in, we're not creating visual hierarchy with the texture. So I'm just kind of give it a little bit of a white background just to separate it from what's behind it. So here's what I'm looking at. And then here's my finished project, and I'll come this way so you can see it a little better without the distortion. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about how to draw multiple images of the same object and visual hierarchy. So look around for things to practice with at home. Maybe you don't have marbles, but like I said, there's a host of other things that you might have multiples of. The idea is to make one of them stand out from the rest, and that's how you create visual hierarchy. As you can see from the drawing that I did with the marbles, there we go. You can see I did the shading and the highlights, and these two are very similar. So it's this little one that creates the visual hierarchy. And the highlight between the two marbles and the shadows kind of lead us right into that blue marble. Or if you just want to go graphite, you can do that too. Simple, easy, but a good way to practice. There's a contemporary artist, Glenn Ray Tudor. That's Glenn Ray, all one word, and then Tudor, just like a tutor, T-U-T-O-R. And I'll put information about him at the end of this video. That produces photorealistic paintings of marbles, only he puts his marbles on top of paintings he's made of cartoon characters that he enjoyed as a child. Many of his photorealistic paintings are nostalgic, reminiscences of his growing up in his youth. So if you'd like to check out more of his style in photorealism drawings and paintings, give it a shot. Until next week, Vincent Hall, I hope you get a chance to practice this. Again, drawing and painting, it's all about the journey and the pursuit of creativity. Don't worry so much if something looks just like something or not. Worry more about, am I enjoying my time? And hopefully you are. I know I'm enjoying my time that I spend with you. So whether I see you next week down in the Art Center or again virtually on another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create, stay safe and be well, Vincent Hall.